Is Sony the only one doing a mid-gen refresh? When is the next PS5 showcase? And I bet you didn't know about this PS5 feature. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to PSReady. This is the weekend update here on the channel. There are a ton of games to play right now. My friend Jake Baldino has been playing Immortals of Avium, and he said it's like an old-fashioned video game, so if you're just looking for something you can run through in a weekend, that might be a good option. I know I have my sights on Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. I didn't really know what this game was. I've never played an Armored Core game before, but now that I've seen videos kind of explaining it and how the whole fun of the game is figuring out the right loadout to get through a level faster and beat a boss quicker, that is like my bread and butter type of game, and I cannot wait to pick it up because it runs at 4K 60 on the PlayStation 5. I know everyone's also probably getting ready for Baldur's Gate 3, but that's what I'm playing, so let me know what you're playing down in the comments below. The first thing I want to talk about today is the situation surrounding mid-gen refreshes, because kind of surprisingly, Microsoft is not keeping up with Sony this generation and doing a mid-gen refresh. They're sticking with the Xbox Series X and S, and they're even taking it one step further because of the backlash to the Baldur's Gate 3 situation, where Larian wasn't able to get Baldur's Gate 3 running on the Series S because it has split screen co-op, right? So they were saying, oh, well, we can't actually put this game out on Xbox yet because Microsoft has this clause where you can't have different features in Xbox Series S games and Xbox Series X games. They're the same game no matter what. The only thing you can change is the graphical settings and resolution. So Microsoft sent over some engineers and allegedly things are getting worked out, but developers have been complaining about the Xbox Series S causing problems since before this generation started, and obviously they prefer the Sony route, which is to just make the same console but remove the disk drive and sell it for $100 cheaper, because then they're only developing for one machine and they don't have to have this ball and chain holding them back, which is the Series S. So with all signs pointing to Sony releasing a PS5 Pro next year, it kind of complicates things in a few different ways, some of them kind of Sony's fault and some of them not really Sony's fault at all. So there are definitely a few ways to look at this, but one way I see it is that they're creating the same situation that Xbox has going on right now, where they have a weaker console and a stronger console, and they make sure that the weaker console is supported. I think Sony's going to have to do the exact same thing when the PS5 Pro comes out. They're going to have to go to every developer and say, yeah, this thing is a completely different console. It's very similar, but at the end of the day, it's a new thing, and you have to make sure that every game that comes to this thing also runs and plays fairly well on the regular PS5. Now, last generation, we definitely needed that mid-gen update because the consoles we got weren't really all that powerful and games were starting to slow down and they didn't have things ready with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, so I kind of understood it. But this time around, there doesn't really seem to be any actual reason to do a mid-gen refresh, because I don't know, man, there really hasn't been a game this entire generation that made me go, wow, this is taking advantage of the PS5. There's been no real Naughty Dog game like we had with The Last of Us on the PS3. There's been no Naughty Dog game like The Last of Us Part 2 on the PS4, which still, if you take the PS5 version of that game, the 60 FPS PS4 mode that it has, and you compare that to like native PS5 games, they look like they're the same generation, right? There's no big leap in terms of how big games are in scale and scope. There's no big leap in graphical quality. There's just games that aren't optimized coming out running at 30 FPS, and the only one that I think has an excuse to do that is Final Fantasy 16 because of how big the icon fights are. But even still, I think if they had a little bit more time to work on that game, they could have optimized it to the point where it'll run at 60 FPS. And I guarantee you, when that game comes out on PC, it will not be as hard to run as some other games out there like Jedi Survivor. And then even with games that were released as next-gen exclusives like Jedi Survivor, EA is already working on a last-gen backport of that game. So yeah, I don't really think there's any reason to upgrade a console yet because we haven't even really seen what it can do. And now we're getting into the PC space here, where the console, the PS5 Pro, is going to start outpacing games and brute force its way through unoptimized media, when the real solution here is to tell developers to actually finish their games. I was gonna say I don't know how we got in this situation, but I totally know how we got in this situation where publishers are totally fine to release unfinished games just to say they released the game during the quarter they needed to. The reason that it's happening is because it doesn't affect game sales. People go out and buy these games full price regardless, and even in games that have tons of microtransactions, people love to complain about that, and I know I sure do, but then at the end of the day, people love to spend money on it, right? The only reason battle passes are in every game is because everyone buys battle passes in the games they're available in, which really sucks. So on the one hand, I am happy that the PS5 Pro's marketing is going to be, yeah, this thing can actually do 4K 60, a feature we marketed with the PS5 back when it came out, but I would rather personally them just work with the console that's already out there and make sure that they set a standard over at Sony by saying, look what we were able to do on this thing. We're able to make games that are single player, don't have microtransactions, are 50 to 60 hours long, look amazing, and run at 60 FPS, even if they're upscaled from 1440p to 4K. And the only reason they were able to do that is because the developers got the amount of time they needed to finish their games. If they set that standard and gamers get upset because every other big marquee third-party title that's coming out doesn't meet that standard, then they're going to be pissed and publishers are going to have to respond. But if Sony goes out of their way to do a mid-gen refresh where the focus becomes the PS5 Pro, then they're just setting a precedent that developers can release under-optimized games for the regular PlayStation, knowing that people who pay more and get the PS5 Pro are going to be able to run these games at 4K 60. But you know, I don't think it's going to be as easy for them as last generation, because I have a 4090 in my PC, and even that cannot run Jedi Survivor at 60 FPS. It fluctuates all over the place from 50 to 60. It still has stuttering, it has loading and pop-in issues, it has all the same issues that console has because the game just isn't finished. So in reality, I think that Sony and Microsoft both have flawed reasoning here for both of their goals. I think Microsoft is kind of crazy to make developers keep developing for the Xbox Series S and not be able to remove literally any features that are holding games back from the Series X. They're really pushing the Series X lately, they're putting it in stores, they're wanting people to buy it, and it's weird for them to be doing that when they know they're going to be holding games back on their marquee console because people own the Series S. I think that's nuts. And they're also doubling down on the Series S by releasing the 1TB Black Edition, which I think is cool because obviously they're responding to the market, right? A lot of people are buying Series S's, but I think one of the big reasons people were buying Series S's is because Microsoft wasn't putting Series X's out into the wild for a very long time. But now that they're out, people are buying them for games like Starfield. So yeah, we're definitely gonna have to see how this shakes out, but I think the best and most positive way Sony can spin this is now they can literally say they have the most powerful console, and Microsoft just showed their whole hand saying, yep, we're not even gonna compete there. We think the Xbox Series X is good enough, and we're gonna hold on to that thing until the Xbox Series X2 comes out in 2027. Whereas Sony's gonna have to do a lot of legwork in 2027 to make sure that people understand and believe that the PS6 is a worthy upgrade from the PS5 Pro. Anyway, next up here, let's talk about the situation with the PS5 showcase, because we got a ton of leaks from a ton of people that said it was going to happen in August, and right now when I'm recording this, it is August 25th, and that means August is over very soon, like next week, and we have not heard anything about a showcase, and Sony usually announces the showcases about a week in advance. So knowing everything we know about the PlayStation ecosystem right now, that Sony wants to announce the Gen 2 PS5, I mean, the shell is out there in the wild. It's like actually a real thing that they're going to announce sooner rather than later. I think it's a when not if scenario with the PS5 showcase, but I don't think it's going to happen in September for a few reasons. So knowing everything we know about the PS5 right now, I feel like the only time that this showcase could take place is either in October or November for a few reasons. The first one being there's a special edition Spider-Man 2 console that's the current PS5, right? Like you can buy the plates, you can buy the DualSense, or you can buy it all in one big package that comes with a PlayStation 5 and a copy of Spider-Man 2. So knowing that the thing comes out in September, they basically have to wait until after that thing is in people's hands, because if a bunch of people hear about a brand new version of the PlayStation 5 that's coming out very soon, that runs the risk of them canceling their pre-orders on the new Spider-Man 2 console that will be obsolete in a couple months when the new PS5 launches. So what Sony could do is a showcase in September and announce a bunch of new games and then do a separate event for the new hardware, but we just got a bunch of the new hardware announced yesterday, right? Like the thinking was they were going to show off not only the PS5 Slim, but also reveal the name, price, and release date of the Project Portal or Project Q or the PlayStation Portal. I don't know, it's such a terrible name. I can never remember now what it's called, because at first it was the Q Lite, then it became the Project Q, and now it's PlayStation Portal. Like, man, these names are just so bad. But yeah, sorry, the event was supposed to announce the PS5 Slim, the PlayStation Portal, and the Pulse Elite and Explore, but now we have 3 out of 4 of those things announced. So what I'm thinking is this showcase is going to either be games only in September, or they're going to have a full-on showcase with the new hardware of the PS5 Slim happening in either October or November, and my money is leaning towards November just because Spider-Man 2 comes out in October, and it comes out at the end of October, October 20th, and there's a bunch of other games coming out around the same time. So if Sony wants to get out of their way, November is a great time to do a showcase and get people excited for 2024. As far as what games could be announced there, I think we really need a release date for Silent Hill 2. It has been over a year since we got any updates on Silent Hill, since all these new games were announced, and that's absolutely nuts because you'd think Konami having all these trailers ready, getting things ready to go, these release dates would come soon after the announcement, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Sticking with Konami, we've got to hear about Metal Gear Solid Delta. They also have the Master Collection coming out at the end of this year. They should talk about the second version that should have Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 4 in it, obviously. Anyway, now that we're thinking in November, Spider-Man 2 will have been out for a little over a month probably, so Insomniac could announce Wolverine, and of course they probably have a Ratchet and Clank game in the works. Both of those would be great to announce. We got to know what Bluepoint is working on, whether it's a Bloodborne remake, port, whatever the hell they're doing, or it's their original game. I want to see what's going on there. We also definitely need to know what Ben Studio's working on. There are a ton of Horizon games in the work. There's like a Monster Hunter one. There's also an MMO that's being worked on with, I think, like Nacon or something like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on with that IP. Naughty Dog's next project, they've said over and over, is going to be a new IP, and then it'll be The Last of Us Part 3. I think they need to tease that new IP because people are really excited about The Last of Us 3 now that the show did so well earlier this year, and they also want to know about the re-release of The Last of Us Part 2 that's leaked over and over again. So there are a ton of games that we know about floating out there in the wild right now that we need updates on, but I'd also like to see some updates on new games from Sony. Also, if they do announce hardware at this potential showcase, that would be a great time to just tease like the silhouette of the PS5 Pro for a reveal later next year. Just something to get people excited for that, since now we know they're going to have no competition. I guess the one good thing about the PS Portal just being a way to play your PS5 is that we don't have to worry about a showcase section where they talk about handheld games, and it can all be focused on the PS5, because from what I can tell, Sony has pretty much abandoned the PSVR 2. They're not going to announce anything at a showcase, I think, for that. They'll probably wait for a state of play. Anyway, that's all I can think of for a potential showcase, so let me know when you think it is and what you think is going to be announced down in the comments below. Alright, next up here, I have a new PS5 tip of the week because I genuinely didn't know this was a feature on the console. I get a lot of notifications when friends are playing games or joining parties, especially when I'm playing Diablo 4 or Destiny 2 on my console, and I just found out that there's a do not disturb feature if you go to the control center by hitting the PlayStation button and head over to notifications. There's just a simple little do not disturb button there, so if you're getting a ton of notifications that are annoying you, there's an easy way to mute them for a little while, and it'll mute them until you turn your console off and turn it back on, so it's not permanent. And the last news story I wanted to talk about today has to do with Baldur's Gate 3 and this weird controversy that popped up seemingly for no reason because of the preload date. So Baldur's Gate 3 comes out on PlayStation 5 the same day as Starfield comes out on the Xbox, which is September 6th. But because Baldur's Gate 3 is preloadable on August 31st and Starfield is already preloadable on Xbox, fans are saying that Baldur's Gate is going to be less ready than Starfield, and the developers are obviously hitting back, saying that the game is not in trouble because of that. Specifically, they're saying we want people to have the latest patches because that seems like the consumer-friendly thing to do. It's not very complicated. And what they're pointing out there is that Baldur's Gate 3 has a later preload date because they want to make sure the version of the game you're preloading is the one you're going to be able to play at launch, which to me is more than fair. I know a lot of people out there who have slower internet and don't like preloading games because eventually when the game actually comes out, the patch that comes out on day one is usually the size of the game, and you're sitting there like, why did I even preload the game in the first place? So knowing that Larian is putting in the work here to make sure that they don't have to patch the game during the preload period, I think that's fine, but it's just so weird to pit these games against each other because Baldur's Gate 3 is not an actual PS5 exclusive. It's coming to Xbox later just because of that situation with the Series S, but Sony didn't put any money into the game. So to use this as the Starfield for PS5, I genuinely don't get it because to me, even though they're both open world-ish RPGs, they're not really comparable outside of that. They have completely different combat systems. One is more dialogue focused than the other. One is a space game. One is like a full-on D&D fantasy game. And if you ask me which game I would rather play personally, despite loving PlayStation 5, I want the game where you can explore in a spaceship and shoot aliens. Like that's my bread and butter. Whereas Baldur's Gate is like a full-on fantasy game where you can talk your way out of situations and get in relationships with people, and it's like more turn-based combat stuff, and it's cool. It's just less for me than a first-person shooter RPG, which is what Starfield is. So I hope eventually we actually get a full-on first-person shooter RPG like Starfield over on PlayStation, but pitting them against each other, saying one's more ready than the other, I don't think it's in trouble, and I don't think that's a cool practice. Anyway guys, that's all I've got for you today. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.